My name again is Grace Siegelman. I'm CodePink's engagement manager. I am so honored and so lucky to be co-hosting our Feminist Resisting Fascism summer school series. This is part two of our six-part political education series designed to equip participants with historical context, analytical tools, transnational strategies needed to confront fascist ideologies and build a movement for a just, liberated future. We're using our ever-changing, ever-evolving feminist lenses for this series to explore how imperialism, militarism, propaganda, and economic exploitation fuels authoritarian movements, and how collective action and global solidarity can dismantle them. First, I'm going to pass it to my lovely, amazing co-host Noor to go over the norms, and then we will pass it over to CodePink co-founder Jody Evans to introduce our guests and our sessions, and then we're going to have an awesome Q&A afterwards. So if you have questions during our session, please drop them in the chat. We'll try to get to them later. But first, I will pass it over.
Thank you, Grace. Like Grace said, my name is Noor. I'm CodePink's National Palestine Campaign Organizer. If you all want to continue to introduce yourselves in the chat, your name, the city you're calling in from, state, country, you can be as vague as you want. And throughout this session, though, please remember our norms. The first one is to please be respectful. This isn't a debate, it's a discussion, and we're not here to mediate arguments. We're here to learn. And take action for Palestine, the people, and the planet. And of course, be kind, be curious. And please, this one is very important. Please stay muted. We record and live stream these classes, so we like to keep disruptions at a minimum. And with that, I'll pass it to Jody to introduce tonight's session.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, in these very, hard days. So, I was thinking how to frame today, and women feed the world while militaries starve it of resources. And the Pentagon's budget is a declaration of war on every social program that could actually keep us safe. And also, every military base abroad is a colonial outpost. Every police station at home is an occupying force. So this session unpacks how current US military strategies, surveillance, and domestic policing uphold systems of white supremacy and gendered violence. We're going to explore how feminist resistance can disrupt these patterns of state violence. As we examine the devastating reach of US militarism today, devastating, I'm thrilled to have a relentless truth teller, the co-founder of CodePink, my amazing, courageous, and brilliant partner in peace, Medea Benjamin, who since the illegal 2003 invasion of Iraq, a defining act of US imperialism, has stood on the front lines of resistance, from war zones to diplomatic halls, exposing the human and geopolitical costs of endless war. From Palestine to China, Ukraine to the Congo, we'll explore how sanctions, hybrid war, and global surveillance reinforce US power, and how these policies impact people both globally and at home. We'll also connect militarism to climate change, mass incarceration, and America First nationalism, including tariff wars. Together, we'll unpack the real cost of US imperialism in a rapidly shaping world. They call it defense spending, but the only thing it defends is inequality. And after Medea, we look forward to your questions, so take note. We'll be ready to help you afterwards. Medea, take it away.
Thank you, Jody, and great to be on with all of you. I love the framing of this, but I do want to take a bit of exception to this idea that women feed the world. Women should be feeding the world. Women should be the nurturing ones, but we know that's not always the case. And so when we talk about feminism, we're not necessarily talking about women that we've had in leadership positions. And I just want to give three examples. It might be very obvious, but important for us to remember. The first one let's take is Madeleine Albright. When she in 1993 was advocating for US to get involved militarily in Bosnia when she was Secretary of State. She infamously said, "What's the point of having this superb, big, beautiful military that you're always talking about if we can't use it?" And this is the same woman who once said that the death of 500,000 Iraqi children due to US sanctions was, quote, "worth it." The second example is Hillary Clinton, who was always a hawk, going back to when she was a senator in 2002 and voted for the Iraq War, which she tried to push back afterwards, but the vote was there. And when she was Secretary of State, she was a total hawk, including being the one to push for regime change in Libya. And then we have Kamala Harris, who failed to distance herself from Bush's horrific support for the Israeli slaughter in Gaza. She also boasted about the US having the most wonderful, lethal military force in the world and campaigned along the torture advocate Liz Cheney while touting the endorsement of her father, the war on terror architect Dick Cheney. I say that because women sometimes feel that it's necessary to compensate for being women by showing how tough they are when it comes to, quote, national security. And yet the men feel that they can put themselves forward as peacemakers, even if it's a big lie. We see this in the case of Donald Trump, who, when he ran the first time around, leaned into an anti-war message. And yet we saw that when he was in power, how he was just the opposite of a peacemaker. But he came back again this time around with that same promotion of himself as a candidate of peace. And of course, we see in his short time in power, the second time, that this is a big lie. It's interesting to look back at Barack Obama, who did promote himself as a peace candidate and even said that he wanted to change the mindset that got us into wars. And yet when he got into power, he too fell into that very mindset. So what is it that leads all of these people, when they get into power, to go in and lean in and be part of militarism? How do we get to the point where we're spending now over $1 trillion of our budget on militarism, and where the Democrats and Republicans are falling over themselves to give even more money to the military, adding another 150 billion into that budget? At the same time, they are taking money away from the desperate needs of people and the planet. I think it's important to go back, if you haven't read, or reread if you have read, the 1961 President Eisenhower farewell address, because it is so prescient about what has happened to our country. When he talked about every gun that is made signifies a theft from those who hunger and are not fed. But today, that military industrial complex is so much larger. The companies that produce these weapons of death are so much larger. The budget is so much more massive, and their influence is so much greater. So too is the connection between the military and our foreign policies and the domestic policies, the violence, the surveillance, the policing. We see the military gear being used by the local police forces. We see now the military itself on our streets, as we see in LA. And Eisenhower's warning of the military robbing us of food is so relevant today when we see the cuts to SNAP programs side by side with this $1 trillion plus Pentagon. Eisenhower did not foresee the climate crisis and how militarism is not only a major contributor to that crisis, but also robs us of the funds we need to address it. These companies that profit from death and destruction receive billions and billions and billions annually in government contracts, making them so deeply invested in maintaining these humongous levels of military spending. And in turn, in what we have as legalized bribery in this country. They contribute massive funds to political campaigns, both the Democrats and the Republicans. In the 2024 elections, they spent over $40 million in campaigns. And it is indeed a great investment because for every $1 they contribute to political campaigns, they receive $10,000 back in government contracts, a return on investment that most businesses could only dream of. Some of us actually hoped, and very naively it turns out, that when Doge was created, perhaps it would look for that big pot of money in the Pentagon budget when they talked about cutting waste and fraud and abuse. But no, they did nothing of the sort. That's why we, as feminists, have been promoting our own ideas of what should be cut from the military. And I want to thank Danica and the others at CODEPINK who came up with this great sheet that we pass out in Congress saying, Doge, we did the math. Here's where $100 billion could be taken from the military and invested in people's needs and in the planet. We talk about cutting the F-35 program, reassessing the long-range missile defense program, cutting the ICBM program, cutting the US bases overseas, promoting diplomacy, and what that money could be used for instead. Also, as feminists, there are a number of other reforms that we propose, like banning political contributions from federal contractors, prohibiting companies with a history of overcharging the government from receiving new contracts, which would cut out just about every military contractor, telling officials who leave the Pentagon that they have to wait at least 5 years before working for military contractors, banning former members of Congress from becoming lobbyists for military contractors, banning members of the military from working in congressional office as, quote, fellows. This is something we see every day when we're in Congress and we walk into the offices and somebody comes out when we say, who is dealing with foreign policy issues? They come out and they're oftentimes the defense, quote, fellows. These are people from the different branches of the military who are actually embedded in our Congress. They spend a year on the taxpayer dime in the congressional offices, advising those members of Congress, particularly in the most important committees for them, which are foreign affairs, foreign relations, appropriations, and armed services, of how they should vote. I feel like at this point in our history, when we are spending such a massive amount of money that only grows every single year, the question is, what do we do? We'll talk about this more in the Q&A, but I do want to mention that there are things that are in our favor. The biggest thing in our favor is public opinion. It is quite incredible that despite what we hear from members of Congress, from the White House, and from the corporate media, the public sees through this. More and more, we have seen in the past 18 months how the public has grown disgusted by Israel's slaughter in Gaza, and the support for Israel is the lowest that it's ever been since public opinion polls have been taking the pulse of the American public. And we see how the public more and more does not want to spend these massive amounts of money on the military. That's why you hear people from the left and also from the right, people like Tucker Carlson questioning why we are spending so much. People like Tom Massey, who recently put a poll on his Twitter account that asked people if the US should be giving military aid to Israel as it attacks Iran. And he had hundreds of thousands of people answering that, over 2 million views, and 85% of the respondents said no. So we have public opinion that is disgusted with this massive spending on military and wants to see an end to endless wars. And we do have increasing activism. Certainly, the increasing activism we have seen around people coming out to support the Palestinian cause and to say no to Israel's slaughter and now starvation of the people of Gaza. But we are also seeing opposition in things like the No Kings rallies that happened this weekend all over the country, with over 1,000 rallies and people coming out by the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands saying no to Trump's agenda. Unfortunately, a lot of the issues that tie in foreign policy were often not tied in to the agenda formally. But in all the videos that I have seen of those rallies, I have seen keffiyehs, I have seen Palestinian flags, I have seen people with signs that bring in this foreign policy agenda. And I do think that our activism, whether or not the people who are part of the Democratic Party and organizing some of these rallies want to see it, we are seeing the connections between the foreign policies and the domestic policies. We are the ones that have to bring those messages to all of these rallies, the messages of massive cutting to the Pentagon, the messages of stopping the U.S. support for these wars, whether it's the war, Israel's war on Gaza, whether it's the war now on Iran, or whether it's the war in Ukraine. And this is something that a lot of our friends in the progressive movement, and certainly many people in the Democratic Party, need to be educated about, because many of them think that it is right to support militarily the funding of the war in Ukraine and don't understand that militarism is not the answer no matter where, that funding the war in Ukraine is simply fueling an ongoing war that is leading to deaths on all sides. So we have a lot of education to continue to do. We have a lot of organizing to continue to do. And finally, I would say that on the international level, it is inspiring to see the opposition that is growing to NATO and the US pressure on NATO countries to not only fulfill the 2% of gross national product that they were supposed to be spending on militarism, but now the call is to increase that 200-fold, to have 5% of the GDP, which might not sound like a lot, but it is a massive amount of money to be spent on militarism. And there is tremendous pushback by our friends in Europe against this call for even more money to be spent on war. So I leave with that sense that the public is on our side, both domestically and globally. Our job is to figure out how we get our politicians, those with the power to cut the military, to do what we, the public, are demanding.
Thank you, Medea. Thank you so much for making us smarter. And I just want to share with everyone that Ann Wright was going to follow up after Medea's comments, but her plane was delayed, and so she's in the air. So we won't have Ann tonight, but she is going to send us some suggested reading materials in the message, the follow-up message we send after this. So Medea, just in your concluding comment, I want to just, for everyone here, you've been doing this for a long time and really have a refined, as we heard, way of addressing this. But, those that aren't dealing with it every day are in the constant onslaught of lies and manipulation. And you've been able to stand against the tide of imperialism and violence every day to know very clearly that war is never the answer, militarism is never the answer. But are there ways that you think and how you evaluate each moment as it comes up, when you're going against a tide and everything the media is saying is the opposite of what you're doing, but you stand there with your confidence, you stand your ground, you lead others with facts, and there's that place where everybody feels upside down, and you've got to move them back with, you know, the facts. So are there things that you do or tools that you have that maybe you could share with the community here tonight?
Well, one of the things that we have done so well in the last year and a half is exposing the corruption of our government officials, and especially when it comes to the money they take from APAC. I think we have to do that more with the money they take from the military contractors. But when it comes to APAC, our ability to show that their positions are so far removed from the positions of the public, and that is because they have been bought out by a lobby group. I think that is very effective, especially when we counter them in the halls, when we counter them as they're going for votes, and we show how cruel they are, how deceitful they are, how they just repeat the same lies or just say Hamas, 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 human shields, human shields, to really be pushing them. And I think that exposure is very important. We have to keep doing it, and we have to find ways to expose all of the money they take from companies that profit from war and destruction, and how they profit from companies that profit from the climate crisis, from big oil, from the continuing subsidies that our government gives to the companies that pollute our planet. So I'd say exposure is one thing. The other is to really use the language that is popular with people. I think asking politicians if they're in favor of endless wars is a good thing to do, because they'll say, well, of course not. All of us want peace. And then following that up, then why are you supporting endless wars? I think when we talk to right-wing media, to be saying to them, actually, you might accuse us of being fringe, of being supported by one foreign agent to another, whether it's the Chinese or the Iranians or whatever, but we actually have the most popular position there is, which is we want to stop putting our tax money into foreign wars. Now, in the introduction, Jody, you said something interesting, which you talked about the America Firsters. And I think it's the position of Code Pink to say that is not our position, that we are internationalists. On the other hand, there is an argument to be made of taking people where they're at and using the popularity of America First among the Republicans, because when we counter them in Congress, we often find these America First people are the very ones who have an Israeli flag outside their office, who have a sign saying, I stand with Israel outside their office, and are the ones that jump up and down to be giving more and more of our tax dollars to foreign countries. And so to be confronting them and saying, what does America First mean if you are in favor of giving billions of our taxes to foreign wars? What does it mean if you are taking money from lobby groups that represent foreign countries? This is something that's worth doing, even though it doesn't quite fit into our worldview of not wanting to be isolationists, but wanting to be internationalists.
Fabulous examples. Thank you so much. And then, you know, we've watched the world really evolve over the last 22 years in a very dark way. I remember the day that the Iraq War started, and I think I was weeping, and like, yeah, what do we do now? And he's like, we're going to stop the next war. And you've pivoted a few times in this conversation today. So how you are very good at pivoting away from the nonsense that's thrown at us into the what has to be done. And if you could share any wisdom on that, because I think it's very hard for people that are in the onslaught of the lies and the chaos and the, I always say you have the tuning fork for peace. How can maybe talk about how do you acquire that tuning fork in the way you're able to just see the American first and use that as a way to expose the violence, and also just the lightness of being that you are, and the love for humanity that you always are, and that everyone is that, and how that really serves your work in the halls of Congress, and also in the streets, and also when you travel. I'm witnessing some pieces of you that are powerful. If you could talk about how others could instill them in themselves and what useful tools they are for standing strong in the face of the violence.
Well, first, let me start with the initial thing you said about how distraught we were when the US decided to go to war in Iraq, and we said, what do we do? Well, we stop the next war. And in that case, it was the war with Iran. And we've been trying to stop that war for now decades. And at one point, we used to count it as a victory, and we supported President Obama when he signed that Iran nuclear deal, and thought that it was a very important example of using diplomacy, and something that he did against the wishes of a lot of people in his own administration and the Republicans at that time. And that brings up the issue of partisanship. While I was talking about the influence of big money in politics, there's also the influence of politics. And it is so sad to see that when there is a Democrat in power, it's hard to get Democrats to stand up against war. And when there is a Republican in power, it's hard to get Republicans. They see everything from such a partisan lens. If there's a good resolution or bill that's proposed in Congress, but it comes from a Democrat, we can't these days get Republicans to sign on to it. It's just crazy. And the same is true if it's a bill that's proposed by Republicans. So one of the positive things of Code Pink is to be nonpartisan, is to not fall into that trap, and to be constantly saying that our issue is not electoral politics, and it's not partisan politics. It's about principles. And our principle is life. Our principle is how do we protect life? Our principle is how do we project the love we have for our families and our communities onto the global community. And we do that, and thanks to you, Jody, a lot of that is by storytelling. It's by going and meeting people around the world. And that's one of the things that Code Pink did from the very beginning, is to say that we have to go and meet the people that we are told are our enemies. And we have to talk to them, we have to learn from them, we have to come back and tell their stories. And we've done that over these decades. We brought Iraqi women to the United States, and they were Sunnis and Shia and Kurds and Christians, and we had them travel around the United States to tell their stories. We've done the same thing with Iranian women. We've done that with women from Palestine. We've traveled many times to Gaza to learn from the women there. I remember the beautiful time we went on International Women's Day, when we took 1,000 gift baskets. And it was so beautiful because we thought we had to bring essential goods, which of course we would want to do today. But at that time, we were told, no, bring them things that make them feel like women. Bring them perfume, bring them pretty scarves, bring them scented shampoo. And we did 1,000 of those gift baskets and traveled around giving them to the women and bringing joy to women, and bringing those stories back to the US. And so I think if we're always grounded in what we want, which is a world where we recognize our common humanity, a world where we can learn from each other and spread those ideas and spread that sense of community and joy, that it keeps us grounded in the day to day, even though we are ground down by those people in power. And going into the halls of Congress almost every single day, it really does become a skill because people who are not used to it, they constantly are saying after 1 day or 2 days, how do you keep doing this every day? And what I say, it is the community that we're part of. It's the community that comes into Congress with us every day and we share those stories. It's the larger Code Pink community that we're part of that really shows the beauty of sisterhood. And it's the global community that we're part of. And when we ground ourselves in that community, I think it gives us tremendous strength.
Thank you. Well, I think that's feminism. So that community and that love for life that is rooted in how you meet. And I want to turn to the first question, which was, what tactics have you seen actually shift public or political will against militarism, and how can local groups like ours scale them up? And I think you just answered that question, that it starts with love and connection and value of life. What we're watching in Palestine is dehumanization. So our work is first to humanize and to be able to respond that way. But are there other tactics that you see that shift? I mean, one for me this year that I just want to bring up, because you in the halls of Congress and the grounding down and 615 days or whatever in Congress, and watching them keep coming back with their stupidity. But I think one of the most heartening things that happened was early on that the people that you talk to are the people that are in the front desk and they're interns, and that hundreds of interns turned against their bosses and exposed their bosses for not listening. So I think one of the things is you never know who's listening, and that we always try to change power without changing the people, because that's what changes power. And I think one of the things you did this year in Congress was really recognizing that you're educating. So even if it's a Republican members or even somebody that's funded $2 million by APAC, you're in there teaching, and the people sitting on the couch and the people sitting behind the desk learn. But I wonder if you have some other examples.
Well, I'm so glad you bring that up, Jody, because that really is perhaps the thing that keeps us going in Congress. We used to go in and we'd say, we want to speak to somebody who works on foreign policy. And sometimes we would get them, and sometimes they'd say they're in a meeting, they're too busy, whatever. And so we talked to the people at the front desk and we thought, oh gosh, that's kind of a waste of time. And then we realized when we see these people from the front desk come out to us and they run after us in the hall and they say, thank you for coming in, or they see us in the cafeteria and they come over and they say, thank you. We really learned a lot from you. It's really important that you come in here. Or we see them in the streets. It is constant. I remember just last week going into the office of perhaps the worst member of Congress. He's a new member from Florida. He took Mike Waltz's place. His name is Randy Fine. You might have heard of him because he's the one, when he was a state senator, he said that the keffiyeh was a terrorist rag. He uses the hashtag bomb away, starve away. He is just a horrific person. And we went in his office and did a protest, taking the tweets, the horrific things that he has said, and reading them in the office and saying, this is just shameful. He should be censored. He should not be allowed to be in Congress. Well, when I was going home that day and getting on my bicycle, who should come up but somebody from the office? And he said, we are so glad that you were in there today. That was so important. Everybody in the office needed to hear that. Believe me, there are people in there who don't agree with what the congressman says. So we have a lot more friends inside than we think. And the other thing that brings up, Jody, is the generational divide. And it is real and it is so important. We see it in the public opinion polls where younger people, even in the Jewish community and even among Republicans, the younger people do not want to keep supporting Israel. The younger people do not want to keep supporting war. And we see that physically when we are in Congress, that it's the younger people who tend to give us the nod and the wink and the hugs. And they are the future leaders. So it is very important and it is very inspiring to go into the offices and talk to them, even if they can't say what they feel while we're in there. They're hearing it, they're thinking about it. We oftentimes leave them with suggestions of movies they could watch, of resources they could look at. And we've had people who've come to us and say that they have actually watched those movies and it changed their minds. So it is very important, the education we do at all different levels. And I know that people are just disgusted with their members of Congress. And, when we put out alerts and we say, call your member of Congress, people are like, why should we do that? One thing is because the people who answer the phones need to hear it. And the other is that eventually they are going to change their minds, just like the title of that book that said, one day everybody will have been against this war. That is so true. And we see it happening already when there are recent resolutions that have gone to Congress where people who we never thought would sign on to them are now signing on to them. So the change is slow and it's painful, but it is happening.
Thank you. I think the patience part is also very important to remember. I think, there's the wanting it to change right now and not recognizing how much money and how many years it's been building and building and building. And so that it does take the patience of eroding and eroding and eroding. And that's about relationship. And that's creating that relationship. I heard from a few people that were at the marches this weekend. And, we see that at the marches, the messages of no war and end the Pentagon funding and stop war in Iran and Palestine aren't part of the messaging. So with CODEPINK and the locals, they show up with this other messaging. And from everyone I talked to in the locals, they were so excited because they were teaching the entire time. Somebody who wanted to send weapons to Ukraine, somebody who wanted actually there to go a war to happen on Iran because they were Iranian and they don't like, so being able to talk them down, like with a member of Congress, but this is war, this is violence, people die. And you realize how much reactivity there is out there that isn't thoughtful. And when you get people to actually reflect, they think about it in a different way. There's just so much of like, I want to stop this in any way possible that doesn't have the depth of thinking or understanding. And so to answer your question, it's whatever we do in sharing matters wherever you do it. I was just on the fast outside of a grocery stores every day. And the chance for people to recognize humanity when they're feeling the inhumanity. I got so many hugs. I thought I had a sign that said, hug me. And all it said was, fast for Gaza, day 7. Because when you're not seeing it in the media, the media feels like everything. And it's full of toxicity and lies. But when you see another human being that stands with you, it allows you to stand there because that you're not in this generous community of peace and love. You're out there all alone, and just reminding us all that, that is the disease of America, is loneliness. And that even just being a place where the conversation can be had is peace. I mean, we're for diplomacy, right? So helping people outside of the toxic propaganda in a calm and useful way matters. So, Medea is doing it in the halls of Congress, but anywhere you are, you can do it because the propaganda is so toxic and so all pervasive that you think it's the world when the country is with us. That number keeps going up. And from the Democratic Party, it's the one thing like the majority of Democrats agree on, more than climate change, more than immigration. So even just being able to find that and have the confidence in it.
Well, and also so many Republicans. I mean, when we went to the military parade this weekend, we took the Code Pink stickers, the Make Out Not War. We had that on our T-shirts, and we went through singing When We Make Peace Instead of War. Oh, how I want to be in that number. And we are ready for a peaceful world. And we got wonderful response from people. We had lots of people who came up and wanted the stickers, wanted to talk to us. We were going to, but didn't have time to do surveys with people. But I want to do that. And I think anybody could do that anywhere at your farmer's market or wherever. And maybe we could put them up, the sample questions on the Code Pink site somewhere. But just asking people, do you think we're spending too much, too little, or just enough on the military, and why? Do you think we should be giving money to for weapons to Israel, to Ukraine? Things like that. And I think we're going to find a lot of people, no matter what their political affiliation is, agree with us. And it is, as you say, Jody, a way to start a discussion with people. And that is just so important and can be done on the one-to-one level wherever you are.
So the next question I see is about what do we do right now with the Israel, it says Israel, US, Iran war. And maybe unpacking that for everyone, like what would be the engagement? What would be the educational tools that you would recommend?
Well, we are so lucky that Senator Tim Kaine today introduced this War Powers Resolution. And for anybody who doesn't know what that means, it is a piece of legislation that says that the president cannot go to war or support a war on Iran without going to Congress first. And it's called a privilege resolution, which means it has to go for a vote. So this is going to be a great opportunity for us to be pushing every senator to vote in favor of the War Powers Resolution. And they're going to have to be on record. And it's going to be a very tough decision for them to make. Do they go with AIPAC that wants the U.S. to join Israel in a war in Iran? Or do they go with the American public that doesn't want that? And I say to people, don't just call your own senators, call your kids' senators, your parents' senators, your brother, your sister's senators. Call, as many senators as you can. We don't have a lot of time. We don't know when that vote is going to come up, but it is a perfect vehicle for us. And then there's going to be the same kind of vehicle in the House. That will not go for a vote, unfortunately, but it will still, we can force members of the House side to put on record where they stand as well. So these are good things. We don't always have a vehicle to push our members of Congress, but now we do. And I think I haven't seen opinion polls, but I really do believe that Americans are afraid of the U.S. joining Israel in a war on Iran. They're seeing the Israelis being killed in this. They're seeing that Iran is not a militia group, but it is a military, and it can wreak havoc not just on Israel, but on U.S. bases, and that would lead to a full-scale disastrous catastrophe.
Thank you. So the next question is, how do you stay calm and centered when speaking with people that have vastly different points of view or alternative facts? I get so flustered and don't communicate effectively or disengage entirely. I'm trying to sit with my discomfort, want to be calm and informed speaker. Any help you can give me? How to
Well,
be a diplomat.
yeah, I mean, one is to recognize that if you don't stay calm, you're losing the advantage. The advantage is staying calm. And so you have to keep telling yourself that. And then going back to them with questions like, do you care about the children in Palestine? Does it bother you that there are children that are starving right now? Is this something you even think about? Going back to these basic issues of children, of life, and putting them on the spot to answer very simple, basic questions about their humanity or lack of humanity. But staying calm is absolutely essential. And I can't say that I always do. Sometimes I lose it and then I kind of hit myself for losing it. It's important to try to stay present and on the high ground.
There's someone else that's wondering, if we're looking even beyond Iran, Israel with Pakistan, India, on the two sides of this and in concern, how do we look at the global complexity that this is tilting?
Well, it's hard to figure out now where the different countries are landing. It's quite interesting that Putin is putting himself forward now to mediate while he's involved in a terrible war in Ukraine. That India and Pakistan both have interesting and complex relationships with Iran, and in the case of India, with Israel. Um, and yet, in the case of India, they have a public internally, domestically, that is siding with the Palestinians. And that is true all over the globe. I mean, it's quite amazing to see that in the Arab world, while they have wanted to not side with Iran or with Palestine, they're being forced to by their own public. And they might be good at repressing their public and not letting them come out to protest, but they know they have a pulse that if they go too far, they could risk losing power themselves. And so that is why it is so complicated. It's so interesting right now that the Western world, and we're seeing the G7 meeting that is just starting in Canada, that they are really now no longer can claim the mantle of democracies as defenders of human rights. They've been exposed terribly. And so it's up to other countries, and countries especially in the global south, to come forward as countries that really do defend the international norms, do defend human rights, do defend the dignity of people around the world. And so it is a sea change, and it is a historic change that we're witnessing, not just alternative economics with the BRICS, but also a transition away from people thinking of the US and the Western countries as the standard bearers for democracy.
So we're coming to the end of our time, and you're talking about this complexity and the darkness. And so, Medea, what gives you hope and what brings you joy? Because it is patience, it is a long road. We are eroding it. And I think, one of the things at CODEPINK we try to create is a community of care to help us all move through this and not be, worn down by what is so dark and so horrible. So I know we'd all love to know what gives you hope and what brings you joy.
Well, while I'm spending my time in DC, I also recognize that the power we have is local. And seeing all these new Code Pink chapters, all these new people who are involved in Code Pink, all of the actions that the locals are doing, that people individually are doing, whether it's confronting their members of Congress, organizing in their community, being out in the community and building locally. That's what gives me hope. And I want to thank the staff of Code Pink for nurturing those local communities, for building the organization in a time when people are looking for organizations that they can support, that they can be part of, that they can look to for inspiration. So that is definitely something that gives me hope. And I must say, Jody, having been with you for several decades now, you give me hope because you are always looking for the positive side, for how we can bring out the best in people, for how we can keep pushing ourselves to go further, find new and creative ways of doing things. And so that constant creativity, the constant joy, the constant looking for ways of getting around the obstacles and doing it in, as you always say, the disarming way, whether we are in our pink or we are singing or dancing or storytelling or laughing. Joy is what we all want to be a part of. And as long as we can put that to the fore and keep that as part of the Code Pink organizing, we will keep growing as an organization and keep bringing new people in. And that is certainly something that gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you so much. And how do you balance, it's like you're the energizer bunny of activism. Are there things you do that give you joy, that that do you have a chance to live life while also being in the halls of Congress all the time? The balance.
Well, my partner Tig says I don't do enough balance, but I would say that, Jody, just being part of this work brings community and brings joy. And I actually feel like this work feeds me, nourishes me, that when I am not doing it, I feel more depressed. I wake up in the middle of the night and think about all of the horrible things that are going on. But if I know that I have to get up early and have the energy to get out and about and do something, I can push myself to have a decent sleep and be ready in the morning to go. So activism is the antidote to all of the depression that we should rightly be feeling right now because of the horrors that we're witnessing in the world. But the depression is something that is not helpful. It doesn't help ourselves and it doesn't help the people that need us most. So we have to keep our eyes on the prize, and that is by being the Energizer Bunnies, by constantly being out there. And I appreciate all the people on this call who are doing this. And I also appreciate that I have the luxury of doing this full time. And many people don't. They do it in addition to their jobs, in addition to their caretaking of their children, of their parents. And so we thank the people who take whatever time they can out of the other obligations they have in their lives to be adding this onto their plate and doing it in such a beautiful way.
Thank you, Medea. Thank you so much for being with us for our summer school. And now I'll turn it back to Noor to give us our marching orders.
Yes, thank you both so much. Thank you, Medea, for being on. I know so many people are inspired by you, so it's really great to have you talk at length and have people really absorb everything. And Jody, thank you so much for condensing all of the ideas and the questions in the chat so well, and getting that wisdom out of Medea for us. So there's one ask I want to bring up before we close out for today. It's for you all to sign our petition to cut the Pentagon budget. There Are people in the Trump administration, they're talking about cutting government spending, right? But they tend to ignore the defense budget, and promise to raise spending to $1 trillion. And, we're just a little over 400 signatures away from reaching our goal. So if you all want to see Medea deliver this petition, then please sign it. We're really close to our goal, and yeah, we'll deliver that demand on your behalf. But thank you all again for joining tonight. It was our second summer school session, so I'm really proud of you all for making it through session number 2. All of the resources that we shared will be added to our summer school resource page. I know the chat moves fast, so if you missed anything, no problem. But just like Medea and Jody discussed tonight, we need to equip ourselves with these teachings, forms of resistance, and feminist theories of change so we can talk to the person next to us, talk to our communities, and change the status quo. Our dreams of peace and liberation are everywhere, and it's our job as feminists to keep those dreams alive wherever we go. And the best way to do that is by talking to people and making them envision those dreams and then making those dreams reality. So, never let people forget about Palestine and forget about the planet. It's our job to keep that spirit alive. But thank you all again one last time for joining tonight. We can't wait to see you all at our next summer school session. That's going to be on Monday, July 7th at 8 p.m. Eastern time, so the same time as this one. We're going to be talking about the war economy with special guest Hannah Homestead and CODEPINK's national co-director Danica Katovich. Thank you all again for joining tonight. You're all free to go. The figurative bell has rang, so you can all enjoy your night.
Thank you, Nor. Thank you, everybody. We love you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.